Welcome to the US Keynote for SCOM yesterday, today, and tomorrow as part of SCOMathon 2021. Truly excited to have an opportunity to speak again at SCOMathon. I had a great time with this last year. I'm really looking forward to today's event. My name is Cameron Fuller. Some of you may recognize me. I'm an old school SCOM guy. Back in the MOM 2000 and 2005 days. I've also been part of the Unleashed team for the authors on that set of books. And I'm currently a Director of Automation Solutions at Catapult Systems. I'm a 14-time Cloud and Data Center Management MVP, and again, really excited for the opportunity to speak on this today. So we have three major things on the agenda. First is a quick history of Microsoft and monitoring. Second is a discussion of where we're at today. And the third is where could or potentially should be in the store for the future for monitoring. So let's head down that path. We're going to start with a little bit of old school history here. So some of this is even before my time, but you might as well at least hear the history of where this all came from. So we'll start with a quick history of monitoring in Microsoft. So back in the day, before Operations Manager, or originally called MOM, before it arrived, we had really third-party tools potentially, but we really only had Remote Desktop, Event Viewer, Task Manager, and some really basic tools to keep an eye on what was going on within our systems. That obviously doesn't scale very well. It's difficult to look across a large environment, lots of different servers and client systems in essence with those types of toolings. So the history on where MOM came from, Mission Critical Software bought a Sentry ALM from Serverware Group, and then NetIQ renamed that as OnePoint Operations Manager. And then Microsoft bought the rights to it when Mission Critical Software merged with NetIQ. So there's a whole lot of history there before MOM was even MOM. So it was a solution that existed from other companies and was acquired by Microsoft. So what in essence that boils down to is there's a lot of history to the solution, even before Microsoft got a hold of it. Though a lot of the code would have changed between now and then, there's still some concepts and some structure that may still exist even from back in those days. So if we look in terms of when did MOM actually come into existence, that was in MOM 2000. So that monitoring framework was released at that point in time. That included a Crystal Reports engine for reporting, which, trust me, people may complain about reporting nowadays, but they didn't or wouldn't when they would compare it versus what we had back in that time frame with the Crystal Report stuff. Now, and then eventually we got to MOM 2005. Funny note here, so I was actually preparing at a company at that point in time, preparing to deploy what was going to be called MOM 2004. It was delayed, and as a result, it became MOM 2005. So there actually was at least a discussion of something called MOM 2004, again, kind of way back in the time. As we move forward, then we get into SCOM 2007. So that was the first really big shift. So that was a re-architect, almost a complete rewrite of the solution that had been developed up to that point in time. So that's where this became, System Center Operations Manager, that rebrand away from MOM to more of the SCOM terminology that's commonly used today. There have been some great iterations since then with new functionality added in SCOM 2012, and then the R2 was integration with what was originally System Center Advisor, and later became part log analytics as a component in OMS. So those tied together in essence and allowed you to be able to connect your SCOM environment up into System Center Advisor or into log analytics via OMS eventually. Then we got to SCOM 2016, new capabilities there as well. They've been building on that base. No radical shifts in functionality, but logical next steps forward in terms of what can be done within the solution. And then also on the structure of monitoring, they added Azure Monitor. So Azure Monitor is an Azure-based form of monitoring, logical enough, I know, based on the name, that allows you to be able to monitor components that exist in Azure and potentially some on-prem as well. It's not really a competitor to MOM. It's really more of a better together type story with MOM. So where else are we today with this? So at this moment in time, where are we at? So we're currently on SCOM 2019. Big shifts that occurred there, the full HTML5 dashboards, though there are some great third-party dashboard solutions out there that I'm sure you're probably well aware of. But they've also added enhanced Linux monitoring capabilities. And then what you're seeing is a steady progression here. So SCOM 2019 UR1 or Update Rollup 1 Added simplified Microsoft patching, Red Hat 8 support, and the rest. Then we get into UR2, new capabilities there, as you see, around change tracking and CentOS support. And then UR3, some more change tracking capabilities and Red Hat 6 support. But the theme here is an important one. So they release a full version of the solution, but then they're adding on new capabilities, not even in full releases, but potentially in update rollups, as you're seeing. So it's great to see the change of the pace of change moving so quickly for it. So we also have Azure Monitor, as I mentioned before. So it's really focused on metric-based monitoring for Azure-type resources. So as an example, being able to look at what CPU looks like and things of that nature, very much in parallel to what we see within SCOM, very similar in nature to what we see within SCOM. But again, kind of as a better together scenario is what they're aiming for. We have Log Analytics. Log Analytics is an event and performance information store. So that allows you to be able to gather data, even natively from SCOM, directly integrated, as I mentioned a little earlier, to be able to bring that data back in and then look across your entire set of data to see what you've got that's occurring across systems. The query language is something called Kusto, which is extremely powerful, very interesting set of technology on that's powering a lot of things behind Azure. And then there's another monitoring solution here that a lot of people may not think about, which is Azure Sentinel. So Azure Sentinel is focused on security. So gathering all that security information from your different systems, bubbling it up together, and then using that to be able to identify things like what are threats to your environment. So it may not specifically be a monitoring product, but it really does a core function that we also see within SCOM from a security perspective, and then kind of takes it that next generation of how do you actively go hunt for threats versus just gathering data and writing reports, in essence. So all that's your history lesson. So we've got what we had, we have what we have right now, and then it's a question of what should or could be in store for the future. So first, we got to look to you guys. The other people out there who are using SCOM on a daily basis. So there's a great, the big SCOM survey results you're seeing here from Squared Up, that showcases, how long you as administrators are expecting to be using SCOM. And the majority, very much on the 5+ year track. And are you expecting to increase or grow or reduce the amount of SCOM? It's on an increase at this point in time. So within the SCOM community itself, healthy, vibrant, moving forward in a solution that people enjoy and want to continue to work with. So that's always a great sign when the people who are using the solution are advocating for the solution and planning on continuing to use the solution. So what are safe bets? As we look at the future of SCOM and other monitoring type solutions, I think it's easily a safe bet to say that we're going to see a continued release of update rollups and updated management packs. That's been rhythm in history now for quite a while, so there's no reason to believe that anything is going to change on that front. So I think it's safe to expect, those are going to continue. We've also got what it looks like a System Center release that's going to be linked to the 2022 server release. I haven't seen anything that officially states that, but realistically, System Center has been tied to the server platform release structure for a while now, so there's no reason to believe that anything like that has changed. And I talked to Bob and some other great subject matter experts out there about, where are we at with SCOM? How long have we got? I mean, it could be forever, but what do we know as a minimum? And we know 10 more years with SCOM as a minimum in terms of support and having the solution available. And we're seeing new iterations coming along. So this looks like it's got a good roadmap ahead of it, and as well as a good long time frame to be working with the solution. Now, I see Microsoft working very heavily on focusing on hybrid monitoring solutions. So this combining of SCOM, which is really good on on-prem and okay in Azure, with Azure Monitor, which is really good in Azure and maybe okay on-prem, depending upon your situation. But I think Microsoft's focus is going to be on that monitoring hybrid type scenario. It's a short term, at least before 2022. I would highly recommend that you want to use user voice to give your feedback in terms of driving enhancements. I don't know if that's going to continue in the long term, if we're actually going to see that user voice is going to continue to be a source of where the product team looks to be able to find what they should be working on. But if you're not familiar with user voice, look at the user voice for SCOM, see what's out there, and it lets you know what's very important in the community. And from what we've seen, the product team takes that very seriously and works well off of the community feedback that's out there. All right, so now let's move from safe bets into what I constitute as good bets. Okay. So the first, I found an article out there about a solution that looks like there may be a version of SCOM coming to the cloud. I can't get any confirmation on that, so I can't guarantee on anything on that. But it seems like a logical next step that could be occurring is, as an example, I was doing a SCOM 2019 deployment recently, and I've spent a lot of time in Azure. And my experience, in essence, is that it took a long time to get my SCOM environment up and running, to get it to where I really wanted it to be. But if I look at something in Azure, if I look at going to the Azure Marketplace and just adding a solution, it's literally as simple as just clicking on, saying, this is what I want, here's my configuration associated with it, and it deploys it. So I think I'm getting spoiled, transparently, because it's just so easy to deploy solutions out of Azure. But I could absolutely visualize something where it would be very similar to that. Let's say you wanted to do a SCOM eval. Imagine instead of downloading the VHD and installing it on a Hyper-V box and getting a domain controller up and all that and stuff and the rest, you literally just went into the marketplace and said, put up a SCOM eval or put up a production version of it. So I would not be too surprised to see that in the future. It just seems logical. The second is, I think, so those of you that are familiar with Azure ARM, ARM templates allow you to deploy resources within Azure. Arc allows you to bring that same type of capabilities to on-prem. So I'd expect that what we're going to see is Azure Arc helping to bring that Azure control that we see within Azure Monitor to more of the on-prem systems. So that seems to be kind of the direction that Microsoft is going. They get everything up and running in Azure, they use ARM for deployments on it, and then they use Arc to be able to take that same concept that we've got up in the cloud and move that to on-prem. So I see that as a pretty good bet as well. And in the long term, there's going to be a couple other things I'm going to talk about here that might sound like, oh, this is going to replace SCOM. No, I don't think it's going to replace SCOM. Anything that I'm going to show here in a little bit. But I think it is important to look and see that where the real strengths of SCOM are. I mean, it provides a good general monitoring capabilities, no doubt about that at all. But it's a very powerful product to be able to provide on specific point solutions that are different from system to system. So in essence, if I want to be able to monitor a specific process, or if I want to be able to execute, something that's very specific to one of my systems, SCOM is really built to be able to do that with the custom monitoring that you can author through it. It's much more difficult than other solutions. So if you were to, as an example, take the normal generic monitoring of SCOM, things like free disk space and high CPU utilizations and other key metrics and things like that, and up and down. If you were to put that into a generic form of monitoring, that still leaves all the requirements that you use SCOM for from a custom monitoring perspective. So I think that SCOM's a safe bet on that as well in terms of a specific point requirements. Now, there's some really cool new tech that's out there that you may or may not have seen, so I was really excited to get a chance to talk about this also. So at Ignite this year, they announced something called Azure Auto Manage. And as soon as I heard this, my ears started perking up and I've started reading up on this. So the graphics here that you see show what this looks like from Microsoft's website and what they're aiming for here. Think of it, let's go specifically to cloud at this moment, and let's focus on VMs. Let's assume that I take a VM, and if I create a new VM, then it's going to back that VM up, or it's going to provide update management for it, so it's going to patch it, and or it's going to monitor it. All the things that are a default, kind of set by a policy. So this Azure Auto Manage, from what little I can see, again, what's public at this point in time, this does not look like things like monitoring for what I'm going to call pet systems. This is not your one-off, synthetic transaction watch system and things of that nature, or something you're writing custom monitoring for. What this is really like, from my perspective, is more like what I'm calling cattle monitoring. So the general approaches that I was mentioning on the previous slide, I want to know about high CPU, I want to know about low disk space conditions, or up or down notifications, setting a series of generic best practice forms of monitoring that aren't really designed to be custom. They're designed to be standard and templated. And again, pretty much for the cattle pieces of things versus the actual individualized systems. So keep an eye on that. I'm really interested to see where they're going to go with Azure Auto Manage. If you go all the way back to, I think, one of the first Unleashed books and one of the last chapters, I talked about a concept very, very similar to this, where you would be able to detect that a system wasn't being backed up and therefore cause it to be backed up as a result. That's really what I believe they're looking at here, being able to apply a policy to say, these types of servers are to be approached in this way, this is what I want to do with them, and then categorizing your servers, maybe development and test and QA and production, and then they're all handled in a specific way, again, kind of for that group of systems, that what I refer to as cattle type systems versus an individualized systems for what they do. So Azure Auto Manage looks pretty cool. Definitely something to keep an eye on top. Another one that I think that is really interesting out here is Azure Sentinel. So I mentioned this in the earlier portion of the session, but what Sentinel's really good at is this whole security piece. So this is not only good at, hey, I want to gather up log information, security event logs off my servers or off my workstations or whatever, but it's also off of network devices or storage components or whatever else you may want to be able to funnel your particular security data from. It brings that all together into a centralized repository and then uses machine learning capabilities to actually look at this and see, well, what's going on? Are there any patterns that I need to be aware of? That are some malicious events that are occurring out there that I should be aware of, that I can go after. So it's an interesting solution on this, and it's interesting to me because what they basically did, in my opinion, is they took one of the 4 core pillars of SCOM and they moved it into the cloud and they applied AI to it. That's a cool pattern when you think about it. I think we have, performance and configuration and security. And now, of course, I'm drawing a blank on my 4th one. Somebody will probably remind me of what that is. But our 4th section was from the health monitoring. And we're just peeling one of those 4 out, putting it up in the cloud, and but gathering data from all the different sources that we could want, and then providing a community of people that know how to query off of this and how to identify potential threats, and again, apply machine learning and other capabilities to it. But what's not in there right now is things like stateful monitoring. So in stateful monitoring, like we know in MOM or in SCOM, we know a CPU is healthy in that current moment, dependent upon the performance thresholds that we've dictated for that system. However, we've changed that default management pack if we have. What's the CPU queue look like? What's the CPU utilization look like? Putting that all together, and we know at that moment in time it is healthy or in warning or in critical state. Okay, so that concept doesn't appear to be here. And it doesn't also appear that there's like some sort of a customized monitoring capability through Sentinel. I mean, you can write your own packs to do data gathering, you can do your own visualization, you can do your own alerts and things of that nature, but it's not the same as being able to carve up a management pack and get down into the nuances of a role or a monitor like you'd be able to do within SCOM. Now, what's interesting, though, is I mentioned the health model aspect of it. Here we go. Here's my 4th. Okay, so availability. There we go. Availability, configuration, performance, and security. The 4 core areas of the health model for SCOM. Okay, I mentioned, like I said, Azure Sentinel. I feel like it's really covering that security space great, which is nice. But we still have availability and configuration and performance. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, you can see standard SCOM and what that looks like from a Health Explorer. Take a look on the right-hand side. So that's out of something called Insights. So Insights is a capability within, at this point in time, VMs and other capabilities to look at the overall health. That's very similar in nature to what we're looking at. So I want to look at CPU or disk space or memory, that kind of a KPI perspective from a health state. So I think there's a beginning of some of that stateful analysis that's beginning to exist in Azure, which is an exciting piece of it, because I think it's an important part of SCOM as well. Then there's also, the performance pieces of this. So let me just give you, if you haven't spent any time looking in Azure Monitor, this is your quick intro to Azure Monitor. So on the left-hand side here, what Azure Monitor is really good at is gathering up key metric information and visualizing that and providing it so you can do alerts on it. Again, very reminiscent of standard SCOM monitoring. But so you got CPU, network, disk, things of that nature, and you can track multiple counters and all that type of stuff. So you kind of see what it looks like. So that, again, looks very similar to the types of information that we get within SCOM from a monitoring perspective out of the base operating system management pack. On the right-hand side of the screen, what you see is an interesting next gen on this also. This is actually looking at the traffic that's occurring, what a system is communicating with, and actually helping to automatically map that intel. I think this actually traces back to a Microsoft acquisition back in the day, but this should feel very familiar, kind of like a distributed application, but done in a more dynamic way so it can just look at the traffic to actually identify. And again, there's third parties that work in this space as well and have some great solutions, but it's interesting to see kind of what Microsoft has, that's up and running at this point in time as well. All right, so now on to, we started with safe bets, and then we went to good bets. Now, I'm not going to say we're on conspiracy theory here, but we're going to go into how Cameron's mind works and see what I think here. So here's my thoughts on what the future should hold. So first is what we've definitely seen is that COVID has dispersed our workforce. Everyone's working remote in IT, and we're all thankful. I would expect all of us are very thankful for the fact that we continue to be able to be employed during a situation that's so challenging at this juncture. But in essence, what we found is that we had to go to a completely remote model. We didn't get a choice. Everybody just went. And we've been kind of picking up the pieces as a result of that. Well, one of the picking up of the pieces that we need to keep an eye on is an increased focus on endpoint monitoring. Because when all of your users are in the office and they're using applications, it's much easier to get a good feel for how are your applications performing. It's very different when you've got people that are working all over the world that might very well be, that could very well be needing or having problems with their particular applications. So we need to be able to learn how do we delve into those endpoints. So SCOM has some capabilities around client monitoring, which is a great solution. There's some third-party capabilities in here as well. But one of the things that I would highly recommend is looking at this from the perspective of how is my application working from my end user's perspective. So I think that's a key piece above and beyond just monitoring the servers and the systems and everything. It's great if everything works well in-house, but if it's not working remote, that starts bringing up some problems to look into. And here's the bigger one from my perspective. I mentioned before this concept of Sentinel, how they took that one of the 4 core pieces of the SCOM health model and they made it into an application that focused specifically on security across all sorts of different things. And I mentioned also how they have this concept of threat hunting. So being able to look across all this data that's out there, try to figure out, is there a threat that's occurring to my environment? Okay, that's very, very helpful from a security perspective. But let's shift that for a second. And let's imagine taking that exact same concept and applying it to availability and configuration and performance. So imagine if we were to have a solution that were to gather all the data across those 3 pillars, pull all that data into a centralized repository, and then give us the capability to apply machine learning on top of it, to have shared common queries that are out there that let you know what's going on in the community and what are people looking for, and being able to do that type of cross-sharing. So from my perspective, that would be the great next generation for monitoring from a Microsoft perspective. So I don't know if that's SCOM, if that's Azure Monitor, if it would be an entirely different solution, or if it's a hybrid of the two of them. But if we were to be able to take some of that power of the cloud, be able to apply ML type things to these, and really be able to look at what is a common issue that is occurring, from a more, let's call it problem hunting, looking across my entire environment and figuring out, okay, not just my servers are up or down or my apps are up or down, but really looking and seeing where are the problems out there that I should be proactively going out there and actually fixing. So again, I don't know if that's a direction that they're gonna hold for monitoring, but from my perspective, if you were to take the concepts of Sentinel, kind of lather, rinse, and repeat using the same components and shift it into the other 3 areas, I think it could make a really compelling solution that would compete against anything that exists out there and probably go way beyond anything that's out there right now. So there's my crystal ball. So let me pull it all together from a summary perspective. So first is SCOM's a safe bet. It is an existing solution. It's got a long history to it, a long good history to it. Lots of good, work that's been done on it and continues to be done on it. It's a great product team out there that's working on it right now and providing roadmaps and new capabilities and the rest. There's a new version that's upcoming. There's new functionality that's coming into it. So I think, if you're ever concerned about is SCOM, a solution I should stay with? Absolutely. SCOM looks like a great solution to stay with, especially if you're very heavily invested on-prem. With that said, I would also continue to think about hybrid, that whole better together scenario. Because if Microsoft is putting a lot of attention into Azure Monitor, and they are, and Arc and ARM and all these other types of things, you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on it as well, because you want to use the right tool for what you need to be able to do. And I'd also watch Azure closely around specific areas. So I mentioned, obviously, Azure Monitor. That's logical. And then, of course, log analytics. So log analytics, can give you some really good information, some really good capabilities. One of the areas that it really shines from my perspective is being able to pull data from a very diverse set of systems and to be able to look across the whole spectrum of systems. SCOM is great in a whole lot of different things, but root cause analysis is probably not one of its strengths. That's something that log analytics can do for you very well. As I mentioned, keep an eye on Azure Sentinel, see what they're doing, see where they're going, and if you're looking for a good SIEM or SOAR, if you're familiar with those terms, you might want to take a look into Azure Sentinel, kick the tires on that. And then insights, so not just VM insights, but other insights that are being added into the Azure solution. So I would go out there and take a look, keep an eye on that, just so you're aware of it. And then I would say that, especially if you feel like you're reaching that point where you've got monitoring where it's stable, you know what you need to know, I would start thinking more about the endpoint monitoring capabilities. What can you find out about what's going on with your users? How are their user experiences? And then problem hunting, being able to look and see, okay, what is a root cause or what is a problem in essence within my environment that my users may not even be telling me about. That's not just proactive, that's extremely proactive. So that would be my recommendation, for the next generation of where to go to with monitoring. So I owe a huge number of people here, and I listed a subset of them on this slide, who went out of their way to sit down and have great conversations with me. Several of them are speakers on this event today, but I wouldn't just want to call a shout out. Thank you to Kevin Holman and Bob and Martin and John and Oleg. They've been phenomenal. Each one of them contributed significant portions to the content of the material that you've seen so far today. And I'd like to put a huge thank you to all of you out there, all of you that are living and breathing Microsoft technologies, living and breathing monitoring tech that's out there. It feels like family. And I look forward to a day where we can actually start doing in-person conferences again to have these types of conversations. And if you happen to listen to this and go to Midwest Management Summit or any of the other conferences that I might happen to be speaking at, come on up, introduce yourself. So with that, I think we're going to actually move into a Q&A around here and see if there's any questions we want to talk through. And I also wanted to kind of put a reminder out there, hey, use the Slack channel. Great way to be able to communicate with the speakers and everything and network, and ask whatever you want to know about. So with that, I'll go ahead and leave it to the rest. I'll leave the rest of the session and hand this off to our next one up. So thank you all very much, and everybody have a great day.